Hi, class. Welcome to week 5. My apologies for getting this module up late. I had some last minute family obligations that came up that took me out of town over the weekend. If you need an extra day to respond to the assignments, etc., please take it. Hopefully, you can still get it in the time frame so we don't get behind. And I will be planning on putting up the next module by midnight next Sunday. So do what you need to do. Please do communicate with me. I don't think I received a reflection paper from everybody this last week, and you have another one coming up that'll be due this Tuesday, tomorrow. So just be aware that you need to communicate with me, stay in touch with me, let me know what's going on, and we'll go from there. So we are taking quite the little U-turn in this week's experiential family therapies. So you'll be looking at the Virginia Satir growth model. You'll be looking at what's called the internal family systems, and in between the Whitaker is the symbolic experiential therapy. So we've got 3 very, very fascinating views of systems work and working with families and individuals. And I will have to tell you that I just love both Virginia Satir and Carl Whitaker, and so it's really fun for you to be experiencing these readings and this work this week. And I'm not as familiar with the internal family systems, but I really like very much, the concepts that are put forth in the textbook. So, and you have questions for the discussion forum that cover all 3 of them. So enjoy enjoy this reading. I wanted to tell you that I have actually, one of the things that Virginia Satir is most known for is family sculptures, sculpting the family. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to do a drawing of your family of origin, a sculpting with stick figures, nothing fancy, and take a snapshot of it or put it on, find a way to get it up online in the discussion forum. Did I ask it of you? Maybe for the paper for next week. One of the 2. I think it did. I changed it over to the paper. So next week you'll be submitting a family sculpture. So she is wonderful to watch, and you will note that in both of these approaches, the Virginia Satir growth model and the symbolic experiential model of Carl Whitaker, that their personalities are very much involved in how their therapies evolved. And so it will be interesting for you to read this material with that in mind. It takes both of these models, by the way, have a lot more humanistic approach to them than the strategic and the structural family therapy models that we have studied. You will note, however, that there are very much the underpinnings of some of the very basic things, both from Bowen and Minuchin and their theories in those 2 areas of approach. The Satir and the Whitaker model, and interestingly enough, also the internal family systems model, really require you to be very differentiated and very clear about yourself and about who you are in the room in the moment. And I personally incorporate a lot of these concepts into the work that I do. I would say to you that I am probably very much in the symbolic experiential therapy mode very often. and it is called The Therapy of the Absurd. The growth model talks a lot about and has some fabulous ways of looking at and analyzing and viewing the family system. There are in both of these some very important assumptions that have laid the groundwork for postmodern therapies, and one of those is that all people naturally tend toward positive growth, which is a humanistic principle. Carl Rogers, Virginia Satir, and Whitaker very much have a firm and solid belief that people have within them exactly what they need, as well as did Schwartz, exactly what they need in order to for the system to grow and change, and for the human being, individual human being, to also find ways of coming into a better balance and to be coming into a healthier way of communicating and being relational with those in the family system. So there is a lot of warmth and humanity you'll see in the Virginia Satir growth model, and also there's a combination of looking at, which is not so much true of the models we've studied up to now, an assessment of family functioning as well as individual functioning. So it really is, in the Satir growth model, is very much looking at both things and looking at putting those together in terms of working with the family. I know I'm saying a lot. I've got a little bit of a cold still. I have asked you to look at certain things that you'll see in the discussion forum questions and in the Fu family reflection paper. So, congruent. Virginia Satir was about creating more congruent communication and relationships with spouse and with parents, and that she was wanting families to become softer and gentler about the rules and to be less rigid about the things that parents were expecting of children and spouses were expecting of each other. It's really interesting, the ingredients of an interaction that you'll find in her work. I'm looking at the textbook, so you'll be able to read this. But the ingredients of an interaction, when you're working from this, when you're working through this lens, the foundation for all of the interventions that one does as a therapist is to look at it through 7 different questions. What do I hear and see? Helping the clients work through this. What do I hear and see? What meanings do I make of what I hear and see? What feelings do I have about the meanings I make? And what feelings do I have about these feelings? What defenses do I use? What rules for commenting? And what is my response in the situation? Okay, so there was also very much an element of coaching and education that Satir used that is not as prevalent in the structural strategic approaches. She was actually at MRI, and then she left to develop her own thing, and she is such a esteemed and revered person in this field. So much of what you see when you watch her, listen to her, and learn from her is that she is always very warm, connected, present, and she does something that most therapists traditionally will not do, which is she uses touch, or she used touch. She's no longer living. She used touch to connect with people. That the connection that she made specifically to each person in the room was very, very important, and she was not afraid of using touch to create that warmth. She wanted also family members to touch each other, and there are clips of her working with a family where she's having the father, who's pretty angry, actually have his little boy come over and sit right in front of him and take his hands and talk to him directly. Before he was doing that, he was talking in a rather angry way about the ex-wife who was abusive to these little boys. And once he did that, his whole tone changed, his whole demeanor changed, the whole experience, you can see, shifted dramatically. So from her, we get this amazing lesson in having people be experiential in the room in front of us. These are experiential family therapies, and is another reason I'm drawn to them, because they all promote bringing things very much aware, alive, and awake in the room, and working with what's right in front of you instead of following a format or a formula. So that is makes it very fascinating, but also makes it harder to get a hold of in terms of what are they doing? Because as you watch these masters, it isn't necessarily obvious. So let's turn for a minute to Whitaker. I actually got to see him work with a family at a conference in San Francisco, and it was absolutely mesmerizing. He was such a character. He was a dairy farmer, and he was an older gentleman who had made no bones about just saying it exactly like it is, and being sometimes his therapy is called the therapy of the absurd, because he would say outrageous things. This family that came in to see him was this extended family, and it was hilarious to watch him work with the grandmother in the family, who he accused of sitting next to him and flirting with him, and what that did to sort of perturb, which is one of the things that he was all about doing, and symbolic experiential therapy is about doing, is perturbing the system as it is, and then watching to see what happens. And his belief was that the system has its own wisdom, and that it will absolutely, after some time, it will adjust and rebalance itself and bring itself back into something that is much more functional. It's interesting that he also, really talked about, his interventions, creating confusion and disorganization, here and now experiencing, spontaneity playing craziness, which reminds me of the irreverence to the problem, separating interpersonal from personal distress, effective communication and rigid patterns and roles, then augmenting despair and amplifying deviation. I asked you, Ashley, to talk about your response to that, and absurd fantasy alternatives. Some of the examples that he gave in here are just so wonderful. But there's a quote from him I'm going to read to you. It says, "I am comfortable pushing the family because of my belief that they have unlimited potential. They have the capacity to expand and progress, if only they have the courage to try. My job is to struggle to mobilize that courage." I'm going to read that again. My job is to struggle to mobilize that courage, not to push under the assumption that I might make things worse, is to decide for the family that they're too sick to care and too inept to grow. That is quintessential Whitaker right there. And the respect that is imbued and embedded in that approach and belief is really astounding. He was also very, very big on being an equal. He was himself, and congruently so, and calls upon therapists who do this to be congruently so in all of his work with clients. He did a lot of self-revelation with them, and he was just he was fabulous. I just get a big kick out of him watching him work. I don't remember much more of the session. This was too many years ago of seeing him work with the family, but that flirtation comment and the way that he worked that with the grandmother of the family was just hilarious. And my impression after watching that whole thing was that what he does, and this is actually talked about in the text, is that he would go in, stir something up, perturb the system, and then go back out. No agenda to make them change or to push them to change or to even know how they should change, but rather to notice and speak up and say things that are pretty outlandish. I love that he had the courage to do that in the work, and you know, that's a big personal preference of mine. But I also think it's a preference because I know that people are coming to us and paying us money as therapists, not to just sit with somebody who does nothing but reflect back at them, but to actually be interactive and engaged and working with what they bring in a very active way. And that's what he did. So here's an example of some of the questions he might ask. He said, "When did you divorce your husband and marry your son?" Quote, "You are aware that you've abandoned the family to advance your career? Question mark. What do you think would be more detrimental for your daughter, missing dance practice once a week for a few months or having her parents divorce?" He's saying it would be an example of something he would say to parents who need to save their marriage, but they're too busy to have a date because the kids have too many after-school activities. Another example is the therapist may jokingly suggest to a client who feels hopeless about meeting the man of her dreams at age 25 that she perhaps consider a career that will substitute for a marriage, perhaps even join a convent. So that's an example of taking and amplifying, he calls this despair, and by perhaps 10 to 20% is what the text says, just amplifying it a little bit, perhaps a convent. And then if it's, again, delivered in a way that is respectful, loving, well-timed, delivered with neutrality, and like it is actually a possibility, then the client is able to see the despair for really what it is and put it back into context. Or if washing dishes is such a problem, this is absurd fantasy alternatives. If washing dishes is such a problem, why don't you invest in paper plates? Or if you need that much space, why don't you build a private cell in the backyard where you can really be alone? I guess that would lead to a fight with your wife as to whether or not to install a heating system. I mean, it takes a lot of guts to say those kinds of things, and it takes practice and a real solid grounding in who you are, and to be able to say them not in sarcasm, but in love. And of course, that at the end of the day, all these people loved Carl Rogers and what he brought. Then we get into the internal family systems, which is very fascinating also. And what I love most about this approach is the fact that it is completely based on the conceptualization and approaches used out family relations can, where is it? It shares humanistic assumptions, fundamental premise of internal family systems is that each person's inner life has multiple parts that form a system that functions like a family system. Hence the name internal family systems. He's identified blah, 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 blah. I want it. Here it is. Each person has a self that at its core is its core and distinct from its parts that has, listen to this, vision, compassion, confidence. And the goal of the therapy is to have this self provide inner leadership to the various parts. I do a lot of part work with clients, and I will tell you that I just, have found that to be true from the very beginning of my work. In the very beginning, one of my first clients was a multiple personality disorder, and which so she had she was that because um, she had been so severely abused in horrendous ways as a child, and so she developed, all these parts that really did not come out in the work until about 3 years in, which is fairly typical, by the way, of multiple personalities. And when they did, and when we got to working and really looking at each one, understanding them, naming them, coming into relationship with them, what became very, very evident to me was that there was a part of her that really had never been touched or abused in any way, shape, or form, and that it was sitting right there as her essence, as the very thing that that Schwartz has identified as, a self that is so much more than anything that she had suffered. Um, a little more on that. He says the internal family systems, the self, is the seat of consciousness and is considered the natural leader of the internal family system. The self is present from birth and has a natural capacity for compassion, perspective, curiosity, and acceptance. The self is both a boundless state of consciousness, one similar to the over the observing mind in mindfulness practices, and an active, compassionate inner leader. The self leads a person's experience in inner balance and harmony. At the most fundamental level, the parts serve to protect the self. In cases of trauma or crisis, the parts will remove the self from leadership to safeguard it. And so much of the work that we do with our clients is about helping them to find that part of themselves, and bring it forward. I will often say to somebody, find the part of you that is wise and intuitive and gets the bigger picture. And I have, on very rare occasions, very rarely has anybody not been able to immediately identify with that. So that's what Schwartz brings to all of this. Anyway, this is a fairly long lecture. I'm kind of going on and on about it. Oh, it's 22 minutes. I'm sorry. So I'll see you on the discussion boards. You know what to do. And okay, thanks for listening.